While you're complaining about your problems in 2025, imagine waking up in the year that killed 1/3 of everyone you'd ever meet. 1347 wasn't just bad, it broke something fundamental in human society that we're still dealing with today. You wake up and immediately know something's wrong. The smell hits you first. A cocktail of human waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies that would make a modern person gag. Welcome to 1347, where deodorant won't be invented for another 600 years. The noise is overwhelming. Chickens squawk in every direction while pigs grunt through the muddy streets, eating whatever garbage they can find. And yes, those streets, they're basically open sewers where people dump their chamber pots right out their windows. Hope you're wearing boots. Looking around, you realize there's no electricity anywhere. No street lights, no refrigerators humming, no phones buzzing. When the sun goes down, your world goes dark except for flickering candles and oil lamps that cost more than most people can afford. The night belongs to shadows and whatever's making those strange sounds outside. Most shocking of all is how dirty everyone looks. That friend of yours who complains about showering daily? They'd be considered obsessively clean here. People might bathe once or twice a year if they're lucky. Rich folks get maybe 4 baths annually. Everyone else just deals with the stench and calls it normal. Water comes from wells that are often contaminated by those lovely open sewers we mentioned. Clean drinking water is actually harder to find than weak beer, which most people drink instead because it's safer. Even children start their day with watered-down alcohol rather than risk getting sick from bad water. Transportation means walking everywhere, unless you're wealthy enough to own a horse. No cars, no buses, no bicycles. Most people will never travel more than 10 miles from where they were born. The world feels impossibly huge when your fastest speed is however quick you can trudge through mud while dodging animal droppings. Then there's the technology situation. Everything gets done by hand with basic tools that would look primitive in a modern garage. No machines, no factories, no mass production. Want a shirt? Someone has to spin thread, weave cloth, and sew every stitch manually. Need food? Better hope the harvest goes well, because there's no backup plan from the grocery store. Life revolves entirely around farming and tiny local markets where people trade goods they've made themselves. Blacksmiths, bakers, and farmers form the backbone of society. Everyone depends on everyone else in ways that seem impossible today. But here's what nobody talks about yet. While you're adjusting to this harsh medieval reality, something much worse is already stirring in the distance. Strange rumors are starting to spread from the far edges of the known world. Your cozy morning routine doesn't exist here. No hot shower, no clean clothes waiting in your closet, no refrigerator stocked with food. Instead, you're crammed into a wooden house barely bigger than a modern garage, sharing space with an entire family. Maybe even 2 families. The walls are thin, the floors are dirt or rough planks, and privacy? That's a luxury nobody's invented yet. Breakfast isn't scrambled eggs and toast. You get a chunk of dark bread that could probably double as a weapon, some watery porridge, and if you're lucky, a bit of cheese that tastes like it's been aged in someone's armpit. Meat shows up maybe once a week, and when it does, you don't ask too many questions about what animal it came from or how long it's been dead. But here's where things get really wild. That small cut on your finger from yesterday, yeah, that could kill you. Seriously. No antibiotics, no proper bandages, no understanding of infection. People die from things we fix with a trip to the pharmacy. A broken leg often means you're done walking forever. Childbirth is basically Russian roulette, and even something as simple as a bad tooth can turn deadly within days. Then there's the travel situation, which makes our worst traffic jams look like paradise. Want to visit the next town over? Hope you've got 3 days to spare and strong legs. Most people live and die without traveling more than 10 miles from where they were born. The world beyond their village might as well be Mars. And speaking of boundaries, forget about personal freedom as we know it. The church doesn't just influence your Sunday morning, it controls your entire existence. What you eat, when you work, who you marry, even what you're allowed to think about. Step out of line, and you're not just in trouble with local authorities, you're risking eternal damnation, which everyone believes is very real and very permanent. Local laws change based on whoever happens to be in charge that week. Justice depends more on your social status than actual guilt or innocence. Makes sense, right? When survival is this brutal, fairness becomes a luxury most can't afford. Life moves at the speed of oxen pulling wooden carts. Everything takes forever. Everything requires backbreaking work. Everything could end without warning. Yet somehow people adapt to this harsh reality, building communities and finding moments of joy between the constant struggles. Well, at least for now they do, because something much worse than daily hardship is heading their way, and nobody sees it coming. The merchants thought they were just bringing spices and silk from distant lands. Instead, they delivered death itself straight to Sicily's doorstep in 1347. Those black rats hiding in ship cargo holds carried more than anyone bargained for. Fleas hopped from rat to rat, and soon from rat to human, carrying a disease that would make every previous sickness look like a minor headache. Within weeks, something terrible started happening to people in the port cities. High fevers hit first, making victims burn up from the inside. Then came the swellings, grotesque lumps called buboes that appeared in armpits, necks, and groins. These weren't small bumps either. We're talking about growths the size of apples, black and oozing, causing pain that made grown men scream. But here's the truly horrifying part. People died fast. Really fast. A person could wake up feeling perfectly fine on Monday morning, develop a fever by Tuesday, see those horrible swellings by Wednesday, and be dead by Friday. Entire families disappeared in the span of a single week. The lucky ones died quickly. Others lingered for days, coughing up blood and suffering through delirium before finally giving up. The disease didn't care about your social status or how much gold you had stashed away. Wealthy merchants who could afford the best food and cleanest clothes, dead. Priests who spent their days praying and helping others, dead. Even the doctors trying to treat patients started dropping like flies. Makes you wonder what good all that medieval medicine really did. Then there's the panic that followed. Shop owners abandoned their stores mid-transaction when customers started collapsing. Market stalls sat empty with rotting food while their vendors lay dying at home. Streets that once bustled with activity became eerily quiet except for the occasional cart rumbling past. Not carrying goods this time, but bodies wrapped in whatever cloth families could spare. People tried everything to stay safe. Some burned herbs constantly, thinking bad smells caused the plague. Others refused to leave their homes for weeks. A few desperate souls even whipped themselves bloody, believing God would spare them if they punished themselves first. Nothing worked. What started in those Mediterranean ports spread faster than gossip in a small village. Trade routes that normally brought prosperity now became highways of death, carrying the plague deeper into Europe with every merchant caravan and traveling pilgrim. And this was just the beginning. What happened next would make these early days look merciful by comparison, as entire communities faced a choice between helping their neighbors or saving themselves. Trust evaporated overnight. Neighbors who once shared tools and gossip now crossed the street to avoid each other. Fear became stronger than friendship, and survival mattered more than kindness. The dead piled up faster than anyone could bury them. Churches ran out of consecrated ground within weeks. Mass graves appeared outside town walls, long, deep trenches where bodies were dumped like discarded cargo. No prayers, no ceremonies, just shovelfuls of dirt thrown over rotting flesh. Families stopped holding funerals because gathering together meant risking death. Parents made choices that would haunt them forever. When children developed the telltale swellings, mothers and fathers faced an impossible decision: stay and probably die together, or flee and maybe live. Many chose survival. Houses echoed with the cries of abandoned children, while parents ran into the countryside with whatever they could carry. The church, which had always provided answers, suddenly had none. Priests died just as quickly as peasants. Those who survived struggled to explain why God would allow such horror. Was this divine punishment? The end times? Nobody knew, and that uncertainty made everything worse. When your spiritual leaders are just as terrified and confused as you are, where do you turn? Governments crumbled like stale bread. Kings issued orders that nobody followed because the messengers were dead. Tax collectors stopped showing up, not because they were being kind, but because they were being buried. Local sheriffs abandoned their posts. Laws became meaningless when there was nobody left to enforce them. Then there's the truly bizarre part. Some people went completely wild. Knowing death was probably coming anyway, they threw caution out the window. They broke into abandoned houses, stole whatever they wanted, and lived like there was no tomorrow, because for many of them, there wasn't. But the weirdest response came from groups called flagellants. These people believed the plague was punishment for human sin, so they wandered from town to town whipping themselves bloody. They thought public suffering might convince God to stop the dying. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. The social fabric that had held medieval society together for centuries simply unraveled. Masters had no servants. Lords had no peasants. Merchants had no customers. The carefully structured world where everyone knew their place became chaos, where everyone just tried to stay alive. Yet even as civilization collapsed around them, people couldn't have predicted just how catastrophically deadly this plague would become. The numbers that were piling up would shock even those living through the nightmare. Looking at the numbers behind the Black Death isn't just scary, it's almost impossible to believe. We're talking about 50 million people dying in just a few years. That's like wiping out the entire population of South Korea today, except back then, there weren't nearly as many people on Earth to begin with. But here's where it gets truly insane. In some European cities, half the population just vanished, gone. Norwich, England went from around 25,000 people to maybe 12,000. Florence dropped from 100,000 to 50,000 in months. These weren't gradual declines over decades. This happened faster than a really bad flu season. Then there were the ghost villages, entire communities where literally everyone died. No survivors, no witnesses, just empty houses with doors left wide open. Meals still sitting on tables, covered in dust and crawling with rats. Some of these places were never inhabited again. They just became legends whispered about by travelers. The weird part is nobody had any clue what was actually killing them. They blamed everything from bad air to angry planets to Jewish people poisoning wells. Some thought God was punishing humanity for its sins. Others figured the world was simply ending. Makes sense when you're watching your entire reality collapse, right? Every single family lost someone. Rich merchants, poor farmers, priests, children. The plague didn't care about your social status or how much gold you had stored away. Kings buried their sons next to peasants in massive pits because there wasn't time for fancy ceremonies anymore. Well, the constant fear of death changed how people thought about everything. Why save money for tomorrow when you might be dead next week? Why follow all the church rules when good, holy people were dying just as fast as sinners? The psychological damage was almost as devastating as the physical deaths. Medieval medicine was absolutely useless against this thing. Doctors tried bloodletting, burning herbs, even wearing bizarre bird-like masks filled with spices. Nothing worked. People were dying faster than anyone could count the bodies, let alone figure out how to help them. But the most shocking part wasn't just how many people died, it was how quickly the plague moved from person to person, family to family, town to town. Within days of the first case appearing somewhere, dozens more would follow. The speed was terrifying. Yet somehow, some people survived. And when they looked around at the empty farms, abandoned shops, and ghost towns surrounding them, they realized their world had fundamentally changed forever. You'd think when half your neighbors die, life would slow down and get quieter. Wrong. Everything speeds up and falls apart at the same time. Picture walking through what used to be thriving farmland. Wheat fields that should be golden and ready for harvest are now brown and rotting. Nobody's left to cut the grain. The farmers are dead. Their sons are dead. And even the people who knew how to organize the harvest are gone. Food that could feed hundreds of families just sits there, turning to mush, while people in nearby towns are starving. Then there's the crime. When you're hungry enough, stealing becomes less of a moral choice and more of a survival instinct. People who never broke a single rule in their lives are now breaking into abandoned houses, taking whatever they can find. The weird part is there aren't enough guards or officials left to stop them. The justice system collapsed along with everything else. But here's where things get really interesting. The people who survive, they suddenly become incredibly valuable. Remember, this is a world where most work requires human hands. No machines, no automation. When half the workers die, the remaining ones can basically name their price. A blacksmith who used to make barely enough to eat can now demand twice the wages. Farmers who survived are charging whatever they want for their crops. Well, The rich landowners aren't exactly thrilled about this development. For centuries, poor workers had no choice but to accept terrible pay and horrible conditions. Now, these same workers are walking up to their bosses and saying, "Pay me more or I'll work for someone else." And they actually have options now, because every employer is desperate. Makes sense, right? When there are more jobs than people to fill them, workers hold all the cards. Peasants who were basically slaves are demanding better food, higher wages, and decent housing. Some are even leaving their villages entirely, something that was practically illegal before the plague. The church, meanwhile, is having its own crisis. How do you explain to people that God loves them when he just killed their entire family? Priests are dying just as fast as everyone else, which raises some uncomfortable questions about divine protection. Religious authority starts cracking under pressure. This isn't just economic change, it's a complete social revolution happening in fast motion. The medieval world's rigid class system, where everyone knew their place and stayed there, is crumbling in real time. What's truly shocking is how fast it all happens. In just 3 years, Europe transforms from a stable feudal society into something completely unrecognizable. The question becomes, will this transformation be permanent or just temporary chaos? The numbers alone tell a story that makes your head spin. 1/3 of Europe's entire population gone in just 3 years. We're talking about roughly 50 million people wiping out faster than anyone thought possible. To put that in perspective, entire bloodlines vanished overnight. Family names that had existed for centuries simply disappeared from history books forever. But here's what really makes 1347 the year everyone remembers as Europe's worst nightmare. It wasn't just the death count, though. That was absolutely horrifying. The plague shattered every single thing people believed about how the world worked. Kings died just like peasants. Priests fell sick while giving last rites. Rich merchants with all their gold couldn't buy their way out of death's grip. The medieval world operated on this idea that God protected the faithful and punished the wicked. Well, that belief system crashed harder than a house of cards in a hurricane. When babies died in their mother's arms and holy men dropped dead at altars, people started questioning everything they'd been taught since birth. Churches across Europe had to completely rewrite their calendars. Why? Because there weren't enough priests left alive to perform basic ceremonies. Wedding dates got moved indefinitely. Feast days were canceled. Some villages didn't see a priest for months because they were all dead or too terrified to travel. Then there's the economic chaos that followed. Imagine waking up one morning and half your coworkers never showed up again. Not because they quit, but because they were literally dead. That's exactly what happened across every trade and profession. Blacksmiths, bakers, farmers, soldiers, entire skill sets nearly vanished from some regions. The weirdest part? Some places got completely lucky while neighboring towns got demolished. Geography meant everything, but nobody understood why back then. One village might lose 90% of its people, while another village just 5 miles away only lost 10%. Pure random chance decided who lived and who died. What makes this period especially brutal is that people had zero medical knowledge to fight back. No antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria, no proper sanitation systems. They were fighting a war against an invisible enemy using prayer and superstition as their only weapons. The psychological scars ran deeper than anyone realized at the time. Survivors developed what we now recognize as severe trauma responses. Art became darker. Literature focused on death. Music turned melancholy. Europe would eventually recover, but it took generations. The continent that emerged from this nightmare was fundamentally different, socially, economically, and spiritually transformed by 3 years of unimaginable horror that started in 1347.